Today's conference builds on the National Development Conference sponsored by USAID, Sweden, World Bank, and other partners in 2017.
And the people of our two countries share ideas, experiences, and work closely together.
On behalf of the President, I would just say that USAID is one of our trusted partners.
On June 27 and 28, 2019, hundreds of Liberians, including senior officials of the government and ordinary citizens, gathered at the Monrovia City Hall for the second Liberia Development Conference, organized and hosted by USAID Liberia in collaboration with the University of Liberia. Held under the theme Implementing a Vision for Development and Self-Reliance, the conference focused on identifying pragmatic approaches to designing and implementing development strategies in the Liberian context, in keeping with the broad pillars of the Pro-Po Agenda for Prosperity and Development, the government of Liberia's signature development plan. The United States Ambassador to Liberia, Christine Elder, gave opening remarks.
Today's conference builds on the National Development Conference sponsored by USAID, Sweden, World Bank, and other partners in 2017. That conference was Liberian-owned and Liberian-led. The overwhelming majority of participants were Liberians with deep knowledge of this country's development challenges and how to improve them. Together, these Liberians helped produce over 39 analytical papers that focused on specific development problems, such as promoting private sector competitiveness, barriers to universal health coverage, and youth empowerment. Those papers objectively analyzed the causes and effects of key development challenges and made concrete proposals of how to address them. This year's conferences focus us on how to implement those valuable ideas and many solid policy proposals that have been developed since that time. So let me close by noting how very pleased we are that Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs, Marie Royce, has come to Liberia to deliver this conference's keynote address. Secretary Royce leads and manages one of the U.S. government's most valuable assets, our international professional and academic exchange programs. The American people and the U.S. government value those programs because they are such important catalysts for innovation and dynamism of our higher education systems, our economy, and our society.
The keynote speaker was Marie Royce, the United States Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs.
And the people of our two countries share ideas, experiences, and work closely together. One of the premises of this conference is that Liberia needs to deepen its policy-making capacity and scale up its knowledge economy. Countries cannot afford to neglect their knowledge-based assets. Liberia's universities, colleges, and technical schools, some of which are the oldest institutions of higher education in sub-Saharan Africa, are the starting point for the knowledge economy. These institutions are educating your workforce for tomorrow. They are doing the research, compiling the evidence, and recording the history on which Liberia will shape its policies and also shape its values. The United States government is strongly committed to increasing cooperation among higher education institutions in the United States and Africa, including Liberia. We support capacity building of higher education institutions and systems in Africa through sharing of expertise, promoting expanded networks and partnerships, and deepening people-to-people ties. In this regard, I'm very pleased to highlight the Memorandum of Understanding recently signed by the University of Liberia and the University of Kentucky, which will support collaboration in the field of public health. We're helping to create this partnership through the Fulbright Specialist Program and the United States Speakers Program. So today and tomorrow, I hope your discussions at your conference will lead to a framework for collaboration information, and effective policy dialogue going forward. Please know that the United States government shares Liberians' interests in taking a rigorous and collaborative approach to governance, economic reform, and capacity building. I look very forward to meeting representatives like Liberia's knowledge economy during my visit here and to finding ways to increase the academic and professional connections between Liberia and the United States. Thank you very much.
The Minister of Finance and Development Planning, Samuel Twe, made remarks on behalf of the President and the government of Liberia.
On behalf of the President, I would just say that USAID is one of our trusted partners. The United States Aid for International Development has a range of programs in health, in education, in agriculture, in governance, in many broad areas. And we continue to work in ways to ensure that our partnership improves the transformation of our country. We believe we are undertaking a journey to self-reliance together, because self-reliance is the only path that we have. We are quite aware of tremendous international support we've always received, but we need to get on a journey that we are reliant on ourselves in education and agriculture. And so USAID's vision of self-reliance, working with Liberia, is welcome. And we look forward to incorporating all of that into our agenda.
Minister Twe then turned to some of the policy initiatives the government of Liberia will seek to pursue and implement over the next several years, including a land reform policy.
In the area, for example, of land administration, thanks to support from USAID again and other partners, we now have a new land law. Land has been a challenge in this country. We look at companies like Sami Darby have had serious issues with land in the past, and we hope that we're able to administer the new land law in a way that resolves these constraints, open up the space for agriculture investment. And so we look forward to seeing if we can get more perspective on. I know the Land Authority people are here. The President is intent on ensuring in the next 6 months that we do a lot of rollout, because the only way people, for example, our farmers, the complaint we hear is our farmers have land, they need title deeds that they can take to banks so that they can get lending. The challenge is financing agriculture is limited, but because of some of these structural issues. So it's a challenge for the Land Authority folks to work on that.
Public sector wage reform, the minister said, was also going to be another priority area for the government.
We've been living with an untenable wage situation for some time, but under the direction of the President and the national legislature, we've been able to work very hard over the last 2 months to ensure that we have a fairer, more equitable wage structure, and the new budget cuts wage by around 33 million through an harmonization program. This is a massive adjustment that's going to be tough for a lot of people. It's a plea of the President and the government that we all have to be understanding during these difficult times as we do these adjustments. But the adjustments are painful so that they are gainful in the end. Because in the end, all of the analysis show that the path to recovery over the next several years will be robust once we do these adjustments.
Fighting corruption, Minister Twe added, was yet another focus area for the government of Liberia.
Governance, the President is committing to ramp up the fight against corruption, to ensure norms of governance are protected and respected. We're going to work to establish a fast code on corruption. We're working to give more powers to the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission. All of those are part of what we're working with the International Monetary Fund through a new program to ensure that we get some relief from the fund. The relief is really going to help the country in its foreign exchange crisis, because we have a foreign exchange crisis where significant US dollar has left the economy, but importers still demand US dollar to bring in goods and to go to the parallel market. So the government is going to be rolling out new measures to do all of that. So we're bracing ourselves for quite some difficult time, but some interesting possibilities for turnaround.
Minister Twe added that creating an enabling environment for private sector investment is important if the government is to succeed in its effort to revitalize the economy.
Looking to work with development partners on not just the adjustment, but also on the whole business climate, the whole investment aspect of this. It has to be about new investment. It has to be about reducing the cost of doing business in Liberia. the cost of doing business, while taxes are lowest in Liberia, unfortunately, the cost of business in Liberia is also high. For example, in a meeting called by the ambassador of France with different shipping lines, we learned that it takes 4 days to clear a ship in Liberia. It takes 9 hours to do the same thing in Conakry. And one of the reasons for that is to say we don't even have a ship-to-shore crane. So prices are jacketing up because of some of that. So I think they're charging around $850 because of that absence. We're looking to address that and other hidden costs. So the point I'm making is that all of the high prices, not because of inflation or exchange instability, it's because there are other things happening in the economy for which people are moving. But we're working through the Ministry of Commerce and the Economic Management team to really address these things. So all in all, tough economic times, but promising. We really look to our partners who have generously provided support to this government, to this country, and promise to do so. In this budget year, we have budget support of around $60 million from our development partners. We promise and commit, and I make the commitment on behalf of the President to meet all of the structural benchmarks that we are enshrining in the program with the IMF so that we have the confidence, continued confidence of our international partner. We don't risk their budget support, and that we continue to do more to attract revenue, attract new investment, and at the end of the day, I think this country will rise again, will shine the true color of Liberia. Thank you very much.
With the keynote speech and opening remarks over, the conference broke up into various panels that centered on 3 broad themes: implementation in a challenging macroeconomic context, institutional reform for policy and implementation, and macro-level sectoral challenges. Each of the themes featured various panels. Let's begin with policy implementation in a challenging macroeconomic context and its panel on resource mobilization and development financing. Dekonti King-Saki, the Deputy Commissioner of the Liberia Revenue Authority, led that panel's discussion of tax policy reforms and administrative efficiencies in tax collections. The goal being to look at various ways in which the government can increase domestic revenues. Commissioner Saki started off by focusing on what can be done to enhance enforcement proceedings against delinquent taxpayers.
We also look at other specific policy intervention for the domestic resource or mobilization. We have, of course, as part of our enforcement, there will be times that we have to go to courts, and so we need to speedily adjudicate cases. We also need to redesign our enforcement and penalty regime, and we need to leverage options for example, garnishment. So if someone is indebted to the Revenue Authority and there's been all of the persuasive methods of getting them to come to the table and make settlement, and it's a challenge, then we need to look at more legal enforcement to enable us to collect the revenue.
Ms. Saki said the LRA, the Liberia Revenue Authority, is looking at what can be done to make actors in the informal sector of the economy more tax compliant.
We also need to look at taxing informality. We have a lot of people who are doing business in Liberia, but those persons are what we say under the tax radar. And some of the challenges that they have is, again, accessing this finance that was just spoken of from our earlier speaker, and to get some of those businesses into the more formal sector, there has to be a full strategy to get them to access more financing, but as they get those financing, then they become more easier to tax, and that will help us to expand the base.
If this strategy works, she said, it could generate huge increases in tax revenues.
If the government and the partners jointly work together in investing into this strategy, the strategy has the potential above and beyond what we are already collecting as revenue over the next 5 years, using what we call the optimistic scenario. If all of the policy interventions are followed, we're saying that we have the potential of generating about $1 billion more US dollar into the economy above what we are currently with our revenue. And that will put us on average of about 307 million annually. But that's the most optimistic, and all of the intervention required may not be attained. And so, being very, very conservative, we're saying at least if we implement this strategy, we should be able to generate an additional 100 million on average annually, in addition to the revenue or base that we have right now.
Attaining this goal, Ms. Saki said, will require investments in more innovative tax collection tools.
So, for example, we talk about having more innovative tax administration tools. We're looking at expanding our current electronic filing to having a more integrated system. Such a tool that will make it easier for the taxpayers require investment in actually acquiring the tools and deploying them. So the need for investment into this strategy is critical. And we're saying that over the 5 years period, somewhere around 79 million will be required to expand your potential of generating about $1 billion. And we think that looking at the cost to benefit ratio, it is a necessary investment that the government as well as partners can definitely look into investing in.
The panel also discussed innovative financing. What innovations can be put into place to give Liberians access to credit? Nicholas Timothy Smith of the World Bank led the discussion and talked about innovations adopted by the bank in connection with a loan program designed to help the government provide lending to Liberians.
What this did was provided $4 million for the Ministry of Finance to provide financing for banks and for microfinance institutions to provide them additional liquidity to on-lend to micro, small, and medium enterprises.
But the program did something else in addition to providing liquidity.
And so liquidity is a helpful intervention. But how can you make more use of that money and leverage that more? So the project, what we would say is additionality. What did we do besides just providing liquidity? Well, what the project did was it first put a cap on the loans for $50,000 US. And as I said earlier, I'd put forth that that's innovation. Why? Because we know in the financial sector in Liberia, for banks, for instance, a small loan is like $200,000, $300,000. So, and with the current microfinance regulations, microfinance institutions are capped at $7,000 US. So, if banks are lending up to here and MFIs are lending down to here, there's a huge market segment that's not getting financing. And you're not going to have economic stimulation and business growth without access to capital.
Capping the loans at $50,000 allowed banks to reach this huge segment that was not getting financing.
What the project did is it capped the loans at $50,000, and what it resulted in was helping to bring the banks to lend downstream and to develop products to cater to the small and medium enterprise segment.
The point is that simple changes to the way banks lend money can have profound effects.
And so when we talk about innovation, it doesn't have to be some kind of crazy technological innovation. Innovation is contextually specific, and it was, I think, a really good example of how, simple interventions can basically, just by putting in place simple rules, which weren't too palatable at first. If any of you were at those first couple consultations, there was quite a bit of uproar about doing loans for $50,000. But I think what we saw is that the banks actually benefited from this, and we hope to see them to continue to develop this market segment.
Mr. Smith also spoke of the need to bring efficiencies to the lending sector and to do away with redundancies that produce wastes and increase the cost of lending for all.
But a big problem in the development communities, a lot of different donors have their own lines of credit. We're equally as guilty of it. And then so you just have this wastage because of the administration of one fund, the administration of another fund, then you have government programs with all different types of different restrictions. And so our hope is that this could actually kind of form an effort and create one fund. So if donor A, B, and C in government want to put money to stimulate the economy, and whether they want to pick particular windows, agriculture, general enterprises, they could go into this fund. So you reduce the wastage from the, every donor and government having different programs, and then you actually have a pot of money there.
Another useful innovation he spoke about is the use of what he called movable collateral and development of a movable collateral registry to facilitate lending.
You know, the Liberian financial sector, if you want a loan from a bank, you need title deed to your land, as the minister just noted, and often with taxes paid for that. And that's a prerequisite. And how many people have a title deed to their land with taxes paid for it? And so the movable collateral registry enables people to register assets like cars or maybe something like inventory to basically use that to securitize your loan. So if you want a loan, I don't have title deed, but I have 2 cars and I have some inventory, and I can use that, and that can be taken by the financial institution in the event of default. So again, it may seem like to some of us that's a pretty straightforward intervention, but for Liberia, that's innovation, right? That's something that's different from the status quo. So what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve these pie-in-the-sky ideas? Are we trying to develop concrete solutions that are, not too expensive to actually help advance, access to finance and financial inclusion in the country? Right now, you cannot receive a loan on your phone. So if you've been to Ghana, you've been to Kenya, you can receive a $5, $10 loan for a market person to basically buy inventory, go buy more fish, and then repay that in 1 or 2 days later, right? Some people do not need a $100 or $200 microfinance loan, right? They just need small loans to help them with the sort of their inventory. And so actually what's interesting is you can do that now. And there's demand from it from the financial institutions, from entrepreneurs. But for some reason, there's not digital credit right now. So we're working with the central bank to basically convene a roundtable, which is one of the reasons I have to leave very shortly. And this is something we'd like to help advance. But the challenge is there's some needed amendments. Under the current regulatory framework, if you were just allowed digital credit right now, you couldn't do it on a USSD feature phone, which means that the people who really need this, who don't have smartphones, wouldn't have access to it. So we're trying to work with the central bank to make those regulatory amendments. And we're also working with them to ensure that microfinance institutions can also participate in that space.
Let's now join the discussion of the Institutional Framework for Policy Implementation theme. The first panel under that theme discussed top-down versus bottom-up approaches to implementation. The Deputy Minister for Research and Development Planning at the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Olai Collins, kicked off that panel's discussion with a look at fiscal decentralization and the decentralization of implementation responsibilities. He said one of the most concrete steps the government has taken towards some form of administrative decentralization was the establishment of county service centers, where people can get basic services like obtaining birth and marriage licenses, land deeds, and even paying business and real estate taxes without having to travel to Monrovia as they previously had to do.
The government established 15 county service centers across the country. In 2018, the county centers generated $1.2 million, something around that amount. They were designed to be a one-stop shop for service delivery at the county level.
While the centers have generally been a success, Deputy Minister Collins said there is a key problem with the way the centers were set up that still poses delays for county residents seeking basic services.
Let me mention here that the form of deconcentration that we have is more administrative than sector devolution. This means that because of policies that are in place, at the county level, we begin the processes for service delivery. But those processes have to be concluded in Monrovia. So for example, if I needed a marriage certificate, a traditional marriage certificate, I will begin the process in Grand Bassa, but to get the final authority and signature to that document, it has to come to Monrovia for the minister proper to sign. What that situation presents is a huge delay in providing services to our people at the county level. Because the aim of this deconcentration is to make sure that people at the county can get the services readily and on time. But if we still have to bring documentation to Monrovia to get signatures, then we still are lagging behind.
Deputy Minister Collins also spoke about the constitutional problem that now makes it impossible to pursue full-fledged political decentralization.
I'll talk a little bit about political decentralization. So the National Decentralization Policy presents a framework for elections of local government officials. But the Liberian Constitution does not allow for that. So when you look at the current Local Government Act, the election of county officials is omitted.
With respect to fiscal decentralization, Deputy Minister Collins said there was much work to be done, and he used the county service centers to drive home the importance of some form of fiscal devolution.
We're hoping that in the not-too-distant future there will be some amendments in the Constitution to allow local officials like superintendents, mayors, and others to be elected to enhance accountability and transparency. So right now, when you look through the LGA, you will see that the aspect of electing local officials is omitted.
Nonetheless, Deputy Minister Collins said the country had made some gains on the fiscal decentralization front.
Again, on fiscal decentralization, the legal framework mandates the LRA, you heard a lot from the LRA this morning, to collect all revenues on behalf of the government. One of the things we experience in using the county service center as an example, at the county level, all the monies come to Monrovia, even monies for the operation of the county service centers. They collect the money and the money is sent to Monrovia and nothing is left there. And then when they have issues or the stationaries or want to do other things, we have to now ask the government to make funding available. We're hoping that when the revenue sharing formula that has been recently launched, when it is in place, that there will be some monies at the county level for the implementation of projects and other activities.
The minister then looked at next steps that need to be taken to ensure the full implementation of the Local Government Act.
Right now, what have we achieved? Under the decentralization program in Liberia, we have established 4 county treasuries. The aim was to establish 8 by the end of the 5-year period of the LD. But due to challenges and other issues, we have only 4. Hopefully, when we craft the next 5-year program, we'll be able to have county treasuries in all 15 counties. Another achievement under fiscal decentralization is the completion and launch of the revenue sharing formula. This is a very critical piece of document that the government needs to look at and begin to put into implementation. Now we are getting ready under the Ministry of Internal Affairs to develop a plan to begin the rapid implementation of the Local Government Act. We need new policies that will allow service delivery at the county level to be started at the county and completed in the county. And then we need to actualize the revenue sharing formula. Study shows that countries that are decentralized develop faster than countries that are centralized. If we must take Liberia to the next level, all of us, including our political leaders, must work hard to make sure that we achieve the provisions of the Local Government Act, which is now in law. Thank you very much.
The next presenter on decentralization was Ibrahim Al-Bakri Nye, a Liberian scholar and decentralization expert. He started off by providing some background about the origins of fiscal decentralization.
This is actually a concept that became very prominent and a debatable intellectual theme in the United States, mainly in the 1950s, when there was an incidence of market failure, and so scholars started to find way out of market failure, and they thought the way out was to empower local governments to deliver most of the services and to create what they call polycentrism, polycentric governance arrangement, where you have more governments with more powers, that you have what is commonly referred to as subsidiarity principle, where the lowest authority must be able to implement the most immediate issues to the communities. And so this debate came about, and they started to talk about what they call fiscal federalism. So the general concept is just about allowing local governments to take responsibilities of tax collection, financial expenditure, and budgeting and service delivery. And so that's how fiscal decentralization came about.
Yes, said it will come as a surprise to many that Liberia had fiscal decentralization many, many years ago.
Yes, we had fiscal decentralization in the 1800s, and most of you will recall this was a commonwealth before becoming a republic. And when it was a commonwealth, the three counties had the leverage because they were, before becoming a commonwealth and a republic, they were independent sovereignties by themselves. And so they had some administrative structures in Grand-Bassa, in Maryland, in Sino, and in the colony of Liberia here in Montserrado. And so they were allowed to collect taxes, they were allowed to implement their own budgets. And even when we moved to the status of a republic in 1847, they were also allowed to continue to do that. And the leverage they had at the time that the central government could not assume full control was because of the infrastructure and communication challenges. But moving forward to the 1904 mainly, when President Barclay launched his plan of interior administration with the intention to claim more territories and stave off the British and French imperial powers, he decided to centralize, at the same time deploying district commissioners, some of whom at some point were American military officers. So we actually have...
Near said today, we are far from a decentralized state.
In 2014, there was a study done by Anwar Shah and Ivania from the World Bank, and this study was about assessing the state of decentralization in the world. And this actually is an important issue for the World Bank and development organizations. They want to know how far countries are going to devolve services, so they put it under the theme, how close is your government to you? And this is the data for Liberia. The government is actually very far from the citizens in Liberia at the time, and it is still very so substantially.
He said the Local Government Act of 2018 provides a unique opportunity to put in place some measures to devolve some powers away from Monrovia to local governments.
The objective of this act is to ensure democratic participation in and out of control of decision-making by the citizenry. And intentionally, we want Liberia to have fiscal, administrative, and political decentralization to the extent that allow the local governments in the counties, the cities, to collect revenue and deliver services on their own. So if this is implemented, this will give the central government weaken, to some extent now weaken, or relax the bureaucracy at the central government and allow the citizens to access more services and participate in their own democracy and development.
Nier said achieving some of the broad goals of the Act, including the election of local government officials, will require amendments to the Liberian Constitution.
So provisions on elections, such as the election of local officials, councillors, and so forth, are now suspended, and so the LGA doesn't consider that because the Constitution needs to be passed, particularly Article 54, Article 56, all are provisions that give the President the power to appoint his list. And to the extent Article 56E, chiefs are supposed to be elected, but the President can dismiss the chiefs.
He then touched on the fiscal decentralization provisions of the Local Government Act.
Now, in the LGA, these are the key principles of fiscal decentralization to allow the counties or the local governments to identify and establish their own source of revenue.
Nier wrapped up his presentation with a number of key recommendations.
Under this principle, there will be own source revenue for the counties, and then the central government will transfer funds accesses grants from donors and development partners. But local governments can go for development financing to finance their own project. We need to complete the constitutional reform process. This process started in 2012, and they have lingered up to this point. We need to complete this, and we need a constitutional provision on the revenue sharing mechanism. How will the central government and the local government share the revenue? This is a decision that needs to be established by law, and not just a policy. It needs to be established by the Constitution. So we have two dominant models in the world. One is either derivation or origin-based. That is, counties that have more revenue, based on the amount of taxes the LRA collects from this county, you must have a framework that says, if you collect 200,000 from River G, 30% of the taxes collected from River G goes back to the local government in River G. That's mainly based on their contribution to the national budget and in the national press. So that's one way we go. The second way would be indicator-based. And the indicators normally you use to calculate this is either the population, the extent of poverty, is mainly base tested. How many educational facilities, how many health facilities. And so if you do either of these, then you have a clear framework to determine how the local governments have the revenue to deliver the services and the responsibilities they have under the Local Government Act. And these options are now before Liberia. The chairman of the GC and the Minister of Finance about 2 months ago launched this formula. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation.
The top-down versus bottom-up approaches to implementation panel also discussed leveraging informal and formal institutions for cross-sectoral community coalitions. Anderson Miamin, head of the local watchdog group, the Center for Transparency and Accountability Quartet, led the discussion on leveraging informal and formal institutions for cross-sectoral coalitions. He began by highlighting some of the issues that can best be tackled by well-organized, broad-based, citizen-led coalitions.
Corruption. We've had corruption issues in Liberia over time, and we continue to grapple with that situation. We have sexual and gender-based violent issues. We have issues around service delivery, poor quality and inadequate services across the country. So these issues precipitate or they necessitate citizens coming together to form coalitions. And when they form those coalitions, what do they form them for? The overarching thing is to pursue a common objective. So it could be to work around education issue in the counties where areas where you do not have adequate healthcare delivery system or facilities. They can come together to mobilize resources to do that. And in terms of how they go about this, what are some of the key principles in my mind that I think they need to respect or they need to honor as they come together to work? One would be unity. There has to be unity within the group. There has to be group accountability. There has to be integrity. There has to be a commitment on the part of these the different actors coming together to form the coalition. And then obviously there has to be resources. They will need resources to operate, financial resource, human resource, and even physical resource. Those things are needed. And they could be internal or external resources. So the group of individuals and institutions or networks coming together have to make some commitment in terms of contributing their time and resources to get the group running. But they may also need external resources, engaging with government, engaging with civil society, engaging with the private sector, engaging with the government so that they implement their dreams. And moving forward also, what are some of the things that they could do? So one of the things they could do, especially looking at the global and local frameworks we have the SDGs that got 17 goals with different targets. Education, SDG 4 is very key. But then also we have the Pro-Poor agenda that is our national development plan, or what we hope to achieve within the next 5 years. So those are documents that they can align their activities towards. So one thing they can do is advocacy. In instances where in communities there are issues, they can come together, consolidate efforts, resources, so that they advocate for reform. They demand their rights. In the case of sexual and gender-based violence, for example, in the case of corruption in the education sector, in the case of corruption in the health sector, they can do that. But importantly also, they can mobilize themselves to take on self-help initiatives, meaning taking on interventions, for example, to address food security issues. They could have a communal fund, they could construct schools, they could contribute towards running of schools within their communities, hospitals, a lot of different things they can do. So the point is, coalitions, communities coming together to work is not just about looking up to government to say, what can government do for us? So while it's true that they can advocate, they can demand rights and demand all of the things they need, but they also need to help themselves, because we're talking about implementing a vision for prosperity and self-reliance. So if that has to be achieved, communities or citizens have to come together to organize their thoughts, to consolidate their efforts and engage with processes, meaningful ventures that help to improve their livelihoods. That way, they take ownership of their destiny. That's the central idea here. How do they become self-reliant? The way to do it is to take on initiatives at the local level or within their communities, first of all, but then also demanding those things that are required by government to do for them. So challenges will also be there. What could be some of the challenges they may encounter? There may be the whole issue of resource constraints. So they got several things to do. We are talking about cross-sectorial community coalitions. When this group of people come together, they have to have resources to work. I talked earlier about internal resources, mobilizing internal resources, and I also talked about external resources. They may also have a challenge around technical, the skills required to organize themselves, the skills required to do, for example, social audit, to monitor what is happening within their communities, to monitor and track what their local officials or their government is doing. That skill set has to be available. So if it is not available within a group, it means they have to look out there for it. So it's also a challenge that they could have. There may also be challenge around commitment. So they have to be committed to the process. Courage would be one of the things that they will have to have. Then recommendations moving forward. In the midst of all of the different challenges we have, the need for communities to organize themselves into coalitions, to engage with government, to undertake initiatives that help to improve their livelihoods in the wake of the declining economy we have right now, where prices of basic commodities have doubled, where unemployment is as one of its highest peak in Liberia. Things have to change. And for things to change, it won't be just about looking up to government. It will be about demanding those things from government, but also making efforts at your own level so that you improve your livelihood. Self-reliant here, again, the central point. So my concluding statement will be, our message will be, we cannot achieve the vision of prosperity and self-reliance in Liberia if citizens do not organize themselves into cross-sectorial coalitions or to mobilize resources to engage. And they have to engage with government, sustained, coordinated efforts. There's more in working together than working separately or working in our own clusters. So for development to be achieved, for the proper agenda to be achieved, citizens have to engage. The democratic space is there. So we have to utilize it. We may have issues here and there with access to information and some of the other things, but we need to mobilize our resources. Some of those structures already do exist within the communities. Some of the frameworks we have right now, like the land rights law that one of my colleagues was talking about, that's a law that is very important in terms of even communities coming together to work around. So as we engage with this process, let's always think and believe that with our efforts at our levels, we can make the changes we want to see. But then also engaging with government, obviously, that has the responsibility to preside over our resources. Again, we're talking about decentralization, but that's the structure and the framework we have right now. We are hoping that we can give more leverage to counties, to communities, so that they make decisions around how their communities and their different institutions are governed, and move away from the centralized regime that has not really worked for us over time. Thank you very much.
Let's now join the panels under the macro-level sectoral challenges theme. This theme featured a panel on health and WASH sector challenges. Dr. Rose Macaulay kicked off the discussion on health and WASH sector challenges with a presentation on the opportunities and challenges inherent in building a resilient health sector. She said one of the key challenges confronting the health sector is the lack of trained medical doctors.
Looking at the number of or the proportion of doctors to the population, Liberia was one of the lowest, if not the lowest. The good news is we have moved beyond that. At the time when that document was developed, it was estimated that there were only 45 doctors in country. Today, we can boast of having at least 300 plus doctors in the country. And the other good news is that over 60% of those are Liberians, so that we can build a system.
She said despite the improvements, Liberia still faces a critical doctor shortage. Accordingly, the Ministry of Health has focused on training medical personnel to help fill the gap.
The ministry identified 5 key priority cadres of health professionals to target for improving. The community health workers, you can see there, you have the community health workers, you have midwives, you have physicians, and so forth.
Ms. Macaulay said the ministry's plan for training medical personnel provides opportunities for those seeking to help Liberia develop capacity in the health sector.
Development partners can use the plan to determine what area they can contribute, whether to support the training of specialist doctors, or the training of midwives, or the training of physician assistants. So there is something that development partners can choose from. The University of Liberia, through the College of Health Sciences, is today using this platform or this plan to engage with training institutions so that they can improve their curricula to be able to meet up or to be compared with other institutions around the world.
Dr. Macaulay said Liberia's healthcare sector faces another major challenge in addition to the need for trained medical personnel.
The other challenge in the health sector is the underfunding of the health sector. In 2011, again, the Minister of Health and Social Welfare developed a health financing policy. And at that time, it was estimated that 51% of health care costs was borne by the individual out-of-pocket health funding. Today, the estimate is that over 80% of health care is out of pocket. So with this high out-of-pocket expenditure, particularly in the public sector, can we continue to maintain the policy of free healthcare delivery? When we say it's free, it has become unaffordable for the majority of people who we really want the services to be free for. Because if individuals have to go and buy the medication that they need, it's no longer free. If the individual has to go buy gloves for the health facilities to use to examine their patients, it's no longer free. So let us rethink what we mean by free health care. The Ministry of Health can use this opportunity to make changes. Well, maybe not Ministry of Health, but the government of Liberia can use this opportunity knowing or looking at today's realities to rethink the free health care. Can we continue to maintain this free health care? The free health care is now killing more people than if we had allowed them to pay. If we allow people to pay, at least they know how much they have to pay, and we will have quality drugs in the facilities so that they don't have to step out there and buy the drugs that are carried in the transparent buckets around the country.
She therefore concluded by recommending a nationwide implementation of a revolving drug funds policy and a fee-for-service program that Liberia had experimented with in a couple of counties before the Civil War.
We all know that in this country we have tried two schemes that worked very well. Although they were in limited portion of the country, 2 counties, 2 out of 9 counties at a time, but we did institute the drug revolving fund and the fee for service. When an individual enters the facility, they saw on the wall that if to see a doctor, you will pay $100 Liberian, and you have to pay no more. And that $100 was accounted for. Today, because of the free health care, we still have to pay the $100, but it is not accounted for. It goes into an individual's pocket. So we are not helping the public by continuing to institute the free health care. And my suggestion today is, let us go back. We have good lessons learned. We have implemented this system. We know that the drug revolving fund works. It puts quality drugs in the facilities at affordable rate. The fee for service works. It makes resources available for the facilities to do little maintenance of the equipment that they have and also of the facility.
Christy Sherman, a former official at the Liberia Water and Sewer Corporation, led the discussion on WASH. He said significant growth in the population of Monrovia means that the city and its environs can no longer depend on the White Plains water plant, which was built in the 1960s to serve a population of 250,000 in Monrovia that now stands at 1.5 million. Accordingly, he said the government must look for ways to reduce the city's reliance on the White Plains plant as its sole source of water.
We look at an area like Painesville, we have a huge aquifer, aquifer is like a well that we can tap into. So instead of you tapping off the line, water coming to Monrovia where the people in Painesville need water, we build up a system right in the Painesville area, and it supplies the whole of Painesville and probably parts of EAWA. Then that way, the people in Painesville feel emboldened. They know that there's their water coming from there. They manage the process, and then with the LS, that's what they call it, the local steering committees, you have someone that will monitor the availability of water. You make sure that the water is coming is clean and is meet the standards of the WHO or the World Health Organization. So my encouragement to whoever is here right now, the donors or our partners, is to look at opportunities, not just renovating the White Plains or trying to increase the water being transmitted to Monrovia, but also look at areas. And we've also, before leaving, I know we started a process where 2 cities, we have one in the Barnesville area where they're going to have their own water supply, the mini system, and one in the Soul Cleaner area as well. They're going to have their own water supply as well. And the benefit of this is, so if no water is coming from White Plains, that area has its own water supply going on. And as well as you also have, it's going to reduce the cost. So can you imagine, instead of you spending all that money on fuel, pumping water from White Plains to Monrovia, you just have a concentrated area in the Soul Cleaner area where you're pumping water up to your reservoir, using chemical to treat it, but it's going to be a lot cheaper. So that's the discussion I'm having around, instead of us just looking at White Plains and expanding the line or changing the treasury lines, which would be like from the main line to the second to the home, we need to consider where we look at areas that have, a great water supply. We'll talk about groundwater and use those areas to build mini systems and where we can improve the water supplies to those areas. So we're looking at Painesville, you can look at ELWA, Gardnersville area. Those areas are areas where, if you take them off the main line, most likely we have water supply coming to Monrovia directly, because the Monrovia water supply, especially central Monrovia, has been a challenge. Even now, after renovating the facility in White Plains, we spent close to $30 million. We still haven't gotten water into central Monrovia. And some of the challenges have been because we have so many people feeding off those lines coming into Monrovia. So whenever we did tests trying to come to Monrovia, we had to shut off those valves that ran into Oro, valves running into sinkhole, just to make sure we got some pressure in the lines. So the opportunity will be going forward is to look in the area that we live in and try to make sure that we can use the reservoir there to build up the mini system. So, and that brings me to the next conversation where we need to start making sure we secure these the underground water supply. We have a lot of systems, a lot of processes where we build sanitation septic tanks in the ground. So that's something we need to, in the next 10, 20 years, we really need to start considering that, once we do that, it's going to have a negative impact on the water supply, on the underground water supply. So that's something the government needs to look at going forward.
The macro-level sectoral challenges theme also featured a panel on infrastructure challenges. And of course, roads were a key topic of discussion. Dr. Frederick Were Higeni kicked off the discussion on roads. He began his presentation by noting a very obvious fact. Liberia's existing road network is far below what the country needs to achieve its development goals.
And currently we have a network of about 11,000 in Liberia. That's not enough. We need, you'll be surprised, we need about 15,000 kilometers for this country to achieve social and economic growth.
So, what's the way forward?
The way forward is that government should start considering moving away from direct provision of infrastructure to concentrating on how it is managed. Bring in the PPP structure, and also you should start thinking seriously of a road authority. I know there has been a national roads fund, which is good, to look after the maintenance of roads, but we should also start thinking of a creation of a roads authority. But more importantly, as I said, government is seen in the counties, so you should think of decentralizing the secondary and feeder roads to the counties so that the counties can manage that.
He said one way to increase the road network in the country, particularly paved roads, is to use what he calls alternative seals that cost a fraction of what traditional asphalt roads cost.
But under the USAID program, we have been able to pilot out some alternative road surfacing seals, and the indication shows that you can, I have the figures there, you can do a single water seal for 120 or 130,000 USD per kilometer, as compared to costs that are as high as 800,000 to 1 million for doing one road. So in 1 million, you can do about 4 kilometers.
He added that there is a poor maintenance culture in Liberia that leaves the meager network Liberia has in a rather bad state.
We don't see any routine maintenance going on. Under the USAID funded program, we have been able to pilot routine maintenance of roads using the community-based organizations, and this has worked. And the figures we are looking at is between 800 and 1,000 USD per kilometer per annum.
He said Liberia also needs to develop a local road construction and maintenance capability.
We need to strengthen the national construction industry. As of now, it is weakly regulated. There's limited capacity. The local firms do not readily access capital. My colleague here has talked about that. So what do we need? We need to develop a strong policy framework to strengthen the national construction industry.
The panel on infrastructure also featured discussions on electricity, led by Moni Captain, who began his presentation with a look at the country's current power generation capacity.
Before the war, we had 191 megawatt of installed electricity at LDC. After the war, that 191 megawatt reduced to zero. By 2014, 22 megawatts was installed at LDC, mainly diesel electricity. Currently, we have 136 megawatts installed, 88 of which is from hydro. And being that the hydro is from a source that is a run-of-the-river plant, only 15% of that is available during the dry season. So what do we have planned? We have planned about 27 megawatts out of a regional transmission line called the CLSG. So if you add that 27 megawatts to the 136, we have approximately 163 megawatts of electricity installed. Projections up to 2030 is that we'll need about 280 megawatts. That will leave us with a gap of about 117 installed capacity megawatts. But of course, it's more than that because in the dry season, we only get 15% of what Mount Coffee produces. So you're looking more at 177 megawatts gap.
Captain then laid out the challenges confronting the electricity sector and its ability to generate enough power to meet demand.
Our principal challenges, generation. I just mentioned that we do have a gap. We have 117, actually more in terms of the electricity gap up to 2030. That has to be provided for. If we don't fill that gap, we'll do load shedding. That's the only way we'll be able to survive in terms of meeting electricity needs. The second challenge is transmission and distribution. We're very limited, as most of you know. The grid is basically in Monrovia, and even within Monrovia, we have major transmission and distribution gaps. So we need to do some work in terms of developing our T&D, not only in Monrovia, but throughout the country. Electricity tariff is another major challenge. Affordability. 1 kilowatt hour is 35 cents. And on top of the 35 cents, we add 10% GST, sales tax. The average in Africa is 14 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can see we're about 150% higher than the Africa average. We have a long way to go to make electricity affordable in Liberia. Customer ease of access is another major challenge. Most customers complain that they cannot get access, legal connections. A lot of that is due to the lack of LDC capacity in terms of their logistics capacity, connection materials, manpower. As a result, those who get electricity, get connections, normally have to go through informal channels, and that opens the door for corruption. So you have lack of connections, you have corruption affecting customer access. We need to do something about that. The next challenge is power theft. 62% commercial losses Liberia incurs, LDC incurs right now. If you put a monetary value to that, that's about $4.26 million a month. So imagine if we can reduce that power theft rate, that savings can go towards reducing the tariff and giving Liberia a more affordable tariff rate. So we definitely have to do something about power theft. The government presently has a bill before the legislature, and the intent of that bill is to reclassify power theft towards away from a misdemeanor to a second-degree felony. We're hoping that that will have an impact in reducing that. The last challenge is LDC's capacity. As you all know, LDC was dormant for quite some time. Currently, we have a foreign company managing LDC trying to build its capacity. So without an effective public utility that has the management skills to provide the services LDC, we really would have challenges. So that company right now is carrying out what we call a tandem management program, where they're training 18 Liberia managers to be positioned to take over LDC's management in the near future.
Captain also looked at opportunities for sustained growth and improvement in the electricity sector.
So what are the growth and sustainability opportunities we have? Well, we need to fill the generation gap. Gus talked about the new electricity law. That new electricity law has taken away the monopoly rights from LDC, which means that private investment can enter the market, can enter the sector. So instead of LDC trying to find money to fill this gap of procuring additional generation infrastructure, private companies can come in, make that investment, sell the power to LDC, and LDC will then resell the power to the public. So that reduces the burden for CapEx on the part of LDC. So private-public partnerships, such as independent power producers, would be one of the key avenues for filling the generation gap. Secondly, we're definitely going to need donor partnerships in expanding national access. That means your grid, your national grid needs to be expanded, has to go beyond the current boundaries. And that's quite challenging. Getting private investors to do that is very difficult, and I think that's where we need very strong donor partnerships in terms of transmission and distribution. We also need to shift generation source to more renewable energy. We need to be thinking about the future. We cannot stick with thermal. Thermal is too expensive. We need to go towards electricity sources that are more affordable, that are renewable. So solar, hydro should be the mix that we should be moving towards. Competition to regulatory regime. This is the MD of the regulatory regime. Hopefully he will create the kind of conducive environment that will promote investment, promote competition, and that way we get more value for our money. So we hope that that can happen. Of course, we want to see an increase in economic activity, because when you increase economic activity, the capital is there to pay for the services. So investors are not investing into a market that doesn't pay for the services, that it becomes an attractive investment proposal. Lastly, we also have the opportunity for access to regional markets. I mentioned the CLSG, the regional transmission line. That's going to be important. If we get to the stage where we have excess electricity, Liberia will be able to sell electricity on the CLSG line. That means whatever excess we have, we can sell it to Sierra Leone, we can sell it to Guinea. Currently, we are going to be buying from Cote d'Ivoire because they have excess. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for growth, sustainability in the sector, and I guess with the right partnerships between the government, donors, the private sector, we should be able to build the sector. Thank you very much.
Mansresu Zeni, who runs a solar outfit in Liberia called LIB Solar, talked about the country's solar energy potential and the challenges inherent in developing a solar industry in Liberia.
The grid will never reach all the rural communities. So there has to be a solution for these rural communities, how they can get energy. One solution could be the solar energy. LIB Solar since last year has installed 100 nanogrids all over Liberia and reaching to close to 4,000 households. Each household pays $8 against this system. LIB Solar does not sell energy. We try to empower the rural communities that after a time of 3 years maximum, they take over the ownership of these nanogrids. The limitations there are that the Liberian weather and the Liberian climate poses challenges. One of the challenges we have faced is lightning. We have lost several systems even though they had protecting on it. Another challenge is power theft. Not all the people are honest. Another challenge is we thought initially, for instance, that we could supply 24-hour current. Coming up in the end, we can supply 14-hour current because our system has to be simple and small in a way that it is affordable. Because people in the rural areas do not have big money that they can afford a real big system or so. Maybe some of them can. So we offer a solution. In the beginning, the people get like a tier 1 electricity. They have 3 lights in their house. They can charge phones. They can play a radio. If they want to, we can extend this system to like a tier 2 situation that could have a fridge, a ventilator, a television. But in this case, it becomes an individual system and is more costly. The nice thing about this LIB Solar project is part of the components, we assemble them here in Liberia, meaning the supports and the cage for the solar system, the junction boxes are all made in Liberia. We bring in the components like solar panels, batteries, and electric lights. Now there is already a challenge. The tariffs for the batteries have gone down, for the solar panels, yes, but we bring in 12-volt lights in large quantities and they become very costly. Now we have a problem. In these 3 years we have to maintain a warranty for the user. So if the light spoils within these 3 years, the LIB Solar company has to replace it. this is, if the tariff would be lower on the components, there could be easier way to access for solar energy for the end user. This is something to consider. Okay. And I think that's the main thing to say. I want to present a little bit better this solution. Why did we opt for nanogrids? Because we thought that it is the most affordable solution. Even though generally the tendency goes towards what they call pay-as-you-go PICO systems, each household gets a small system and then pays by mobile money or whatever, small against it. What he receives is more costly compared to what a nanogrid can deliver to him. The limitation of the nanogrid is the community has to work together, which again for our company is a winner because we are dealing not with individuals but with the community. So the community, knowing that after 3 years they take over ownership of this system, have an interest that this thing functions. LRB Solar also offers an incentive. A community that pays 5 times on time gets 1 month for free. So they pay earlier for the system because for us, naturally, it is important that we get our investment back. Important in this is a privately financed project. So there is an investment that really has to work. We are condemned to success. It is not that we have a donor where we can go and say, oh, sorry, we only distributed 3 lights, even though on the plan we said 1,000. No. We are answerable to people. We have to deliver result. There is a big difference compared to most other projects. And also, it is a challenge for us to maintain these systems. As I said initially, one of the challenges is power theft. Now, on a nanogrid, if somebody steals electricity, I have to send, or an electrician has to go in the village and check all the lines. The man will be busy at least 1 day before he finds the house or the hut where people have tapped onto the energy. So it is a little bit challenging in running like 100 nanogrids over Liberia, but on the other side, the people get more value out of it. They get 14 hours of light, whereas with most PICO systems, they would have 4 or 5 hours of light maximum. Thank you for your attention.
Augusta Guano of the Liberia Electricity Regulatory Commission talked about how to improve the electricity sector by making the market more competitive and targeting big consumers.
What has happened over the years, there has not been any strategic approach to focus on the quality and reliability of the system at LDC. That is the issue. So once there's competition, you will see that will change. And also the current approach has focused more on reaching out to small users. And if we want the utility to be profitable, which is a very big business, very cost-intensive, capital-intensive business, we need to focus on big industries and companies that will be able to generate, that need electricity to actually as an input for production and also an input for economic activities, like the cement factory, the hotels, the breweries, all these big companies, the mining companies. And we are lacking this at this time because we cannot supply all of them as a country.
Guano also stressed the need to look to the private sector as sources of investment in the electricity sector.
We tap into the private sector. Most of the money we are looking for, even though we have do not financing in the power sector, but there are a lot of money there in the private market that we can tap into. But how can we attract private investment in the sector? And we have to be very fast in looking at governance of the sector governance, the power sector, because we have management contracts for the first time. We have a second one now. Are we looking for third one? No. We need to also look at the issue of governance. And also the issue of low economic value. Most people think that power is just for entertainment and everything, but you can be involved in the productive activities, productive uses, into income generation, into activities that will create more jobs.
Guanu wrapped up his presentation by looking at how Liberia can overcome the challenges facing the electricity sector.
We overcome these challenges. There's a need for integrated resource planning. What do we mean? We have to have a mix of different inputs to make sure that we can sustain our generation capacity, because electricity is a very capital intensive, and we also have to make sure that we pull together all the different resources to make sure that we have a balanced generation. Increase our firm capacity. As I said earlier, how do we increase that? By getting involved in more generation, like for instance, we are bringing the cross-border with Transport CLSG, and they have to also help to increase our generation capacity. As I told you, prior to the war, LDC is currently at 66% of its pre-war capacity. And how do we even reach 191 megawatt to even go beyond the current demand? So it means we have to also undertake critical infrastructure investments, that is more transmission and distribution. It's good that we have different projects, like the three-corridor project, the CLSG, and the cross-border. But the need for us to actually interconnect these different things. Like for instance, USAID support to LDC is bringing power from Ganta all the way to Banga, and to Phoebe, Cottington, and SKT. And then we have to attract private investment as well. And the most important part is the issue of a credible regulatory system. If we don't have the credible regulatory system in place with all the different parameters, we will not have private sector coming in to invest. And finally, we have to commercialize the sector. The electricity sector has to be commercialized. It is not a welfare-driven initiative or donor-driven. It should be donor-driven, but it should be profitable so that we can be able to generate more money and invest more in the system. That's the way to go. Thank you.
The theme on macro-level sectoral challenges also featured a panel on addressing special challenges, vulnerable populations, and food security. Ms. Carolyn Brown Bora was the panel's key person on the issue of social protection and food security for vulnerable populations. She said the Liberia Feminist Forum, which she co-founded, and other women's rights organizations in Liberia, did a gender and feminist analysis of the 4 pillars of the Pro-Po Agenda for Prosperity and Development, the National Development Strategy of the Liberian government. Her presentation centered on the results of that analysis.
Realized there were a number of limitations. So one of the first limitations was that there was no women's rights or any gender analysis that was conducted. It was merely from an economic perspective. Secondly, development inequality is not as same as gender inequality, and this they did not take into account. The problem analysis that was presented within the proposed development agenda did not have a theory of change. So there's a problem analysis without a theory of change. And then also a context was presented, right? But across the pillars, we also realized that there were inconsistencies in the data that was presented, so that it did not align to all the sectors or all the pillars. Other issues that we want to flag is in terms of the intersectional issues and the potential missed opportunities. Overall, there are challenges to intersectional opportunities that are related to the 4 pillars and the different target groups that live in poverty, women and girls, young people, but the framework or the policy document did not do a sectoral analysis separately without establishing and highlighting the intersection for all these different categories of persons. So one of the recommendations that we put forward is that it's important to do a coherent and connected in-depth analysis to show the status of women, girls, and other people who are excluded and targeted groups, so that in terms of the pillar, so the pillar is on power to people, so how do that reflect within what the pillar is presenting? And to do this, we recommended that there be a full gender analysis that focuses on power and structural causes of violence against women in terms of the economic, social, and political perspectives. There is a budget provided, there is a budget that is estimated at 6 billion USD, and it will be important for us to understand how this total funding is allocated across the sector, or how much is for youth, how much is for women, across that sector. This will be one of the recommendations we put forward. I also like to highlight here the increase in cases of sexual and gender-based violence quite recently. So within just the first quarter of 2019, we are receiving, and this is also to know that there is a huge underreporting of cases, and some of the stats that we are getting from the Ministry of Gender does not include all actors working within the field. So just for the quarter of 2019, we are receiving around, the Ministry of Gender is reporting around 803 cases. For 2014, we had 1,392 cases. For 2015, 1,403 cases. For 2015, 1,505 cases. And for 2017, 1,685 cases. And for 2018, 2,105 cases. I'm bringing this up to our attention to show the increase and the spike in cases. And between November and currently there's been several cases of gang rape, and in fact leading to death for some of the survivors of the victims. We also need to look at, so because of the increase in cases, some of what the women's group have done is the Liberian Feminist Forum and have started the We Are Unprotected campaign. This is a campaign that we're trying to increase the visibility to sexual and gender-based violence cases, but also to recognize the lack of accountability for these cases that are brought to the attention or that have been reported. When we also looked at the policy framework, we are concerned about blanketing vulnerable and disadvantaged people, especially women who are placed at the same level as disabled people and other marginalized groups. It's important that we separate these groups so that in terms of how we program, it's very clear. Wow, 5 minutes. Okay, so I'll run this for Pillar 1. So for Pillar 2, when we looked at Pillar 2, which focuses on job and the economy, a number of issues come up. One is that the economic model that is presented, how does it provide for inclusive participation and sustainability? And the model, in our view, does not provide for inclusivity both for women and youth and other interest groups. We fear also that when we limit women to small-scale economic activity, both in the agriculture and other sectors, we also recognize that the protection mechanisms that are being put in place for food production and subsistence farming, in seeking cash and cropping and large-scale farming are not sufficiently addressed within the policy framework. The pillar also lacks comprehensive social and gender analysis. They are rating mainly from an economic perspective rather from the perspective that I just mentioned. Again, the pillar is heavily focusing on infrastructure. So in terms of the gender analysis, if we are constructing roads, what are the gender needs of women? How do we take that into account? If we are constructing hospitals, what are the needs for women? How do we take this into account? Also, procurement policies, we need affirmative actions for procurement policy to also consider women. New debt that the government will be securing should not deprive social services for the population. And also, what are the working conditions? So when we give our concessions, contracts, what are the working conditions for our population so that there are no occupational hazards, and what are the labor rights implications? Minimum minutes I have. So for concessions, when we award concessions, how are we awarding it to include women and other communities? This afternoon there was a discussion about the community land rights. So how does they interplay within such discussion? And also, it's important to consider the role of women, especially rural women, as farmers, as producers, and as processors, and as caretakers. We also feel that there's a need to create access to credit and technology to increase the level of productivity for these target beneficiaries, we realized that the government extension programs that are provided by the Ministry of Agriculture should also take into consideration the needs of women, and they should, so that it does not exacerbate the disparities between men and women. And then also about sustainability, what is the impact of climate change, disasters? You mentioned the Ebola crisis, for example. What lessons do we learn from that in terms of also for food production, food security, and climate change? How does it affect the investment that we want to make? And then lastly, some more points. Yeah, but you just. So also we want to talk about development agricultural policies that favor climate resilient and sustainable agriculture instead of just focusing on private and concession-based. What are the high inputs and large agro business models? This morning there was a mention around this discussion. So when you come to the last pillar is on Pillar 4. So Pillar 4 talks about access to justice for women. What we also realized from that pillar was that there was not sufficient analysis done around women, peace and security, and access to land, and to expand this to include, for example, law and policy reforms, which will be aimed at protecting and advancing women's and girls' rights. We also picked up also that issue around mental health for different categories of people is not also, the policy document is not informed by such issue, and then also what is the dealing with reparations, dealing with the past is not sufficiently dealt with, because this has a propensity to regress so that we go back into a civil crisis. So it's important for the policy framework that is talking about power to the people that wants to build sustainable structures. How do we deal with the war issues? And also, how do we expand the services of security sector? Because one of the biggest challenge we have is around the access to justice. So you do have a number of reporting of cases, you do have women coming forward to tell their stories, but there is impunity, and some of the reasons are many. There are structural weaknesses, for example, police are challenged with logistics, the courts does not function, the courts are not decentralized, so you have one circuit court in a particular region, and certain cases are to be held in a particular court. So all of these create challenges for, in terms of accessing justice for women who come forth. So some of the recommendations that we also put forward are around what are the commitments from the government in terms of gender responsive budgeting, the review of the gender parity bill, also the constitutional reform, because there are areas that are concerning women, and we think that it's important to bring this chapter to close. And then also a commitment from the government to review the whole privatization policy. What are the issues for education? Because in that way, we can address a number of issues for vulnerable people.
Mohammed Kamara, a rice farmer, aggregator, and processor, led the panel's discussion on improving the business climate. He focused his presentation on the rice sector and what the government and the private sector can do together to improve the business climate for the rice sector.
As he suggests the following activities to develop the rice subsector: increase access to inputs and machinery, provide subsidies to items along the value chain, recruit active agriculture experts and agronomists in the rice subsector, introduce government rice subsidies for supporting producers, cooperatives, and major rice processors, increasing access to finance, and establish contact between rice processors and main public institutions. Provision of the appropriate mini and medium mechanized equipment and input to farmers, including appropriate training through PPP arrangement. subsidized from government and international partners to effectively carry out extensive production and processing of raw material to end user or consumer. They will increase sustainability, economic viability for both urban and rural communities. Trained agriculture technicians and agronomists from government and aid partners, scholarship schemes should be infused into the rice subsector. Government has allocated $8 million to subsidize the importation of the rice. This amount should be allocated annually to make the rice processors and producing institutions such as cooperative companies and associations to reduce the importation of rice. Establish access to finance through short and long-term loans to adequately support the sector for sustainability. Afriland Bank is leading short and medium-term loan in this regard, despite the criteria on collateral. Rice processors should be contracted by government to supply ministry and agencies, the army prison, government hospital, and the police on a monthly basis. Encouraging lowland farm. You see, when you look at our economic practices in terms of productivities, we cannot be able to continue on the upland. Look at the deforestations, all right? And then we have a lot of lowland in our own country. So what we are saying is that 3 times instead of 1 time, because in my own deliberation from the concept in my preview, you will see to it that 1 time or harvest is not good for our country right now if we want to make sure that we become sustainable in our own food production. So we are saying that lowland should be encouraged farming because we have 3 times productions. Okay, now to tell you the kind of activity that we do in our own communities, we're training people to use the appropriate insecticides and how to carry on their farming activities. There is an improved technology. I think you can see the kind of demonstration we always apply. We train people to make sure that we are on task. Yes, okay, there is a newly constructed rice processing facilities, which of course we are expecting that we'll be having one of the biggest rice integrated rice machine through the support of USAID and every ladder. You see, as I told you, we introduce mechanizations on our own level. But you can see the kind of practical thing that we're doing. And you look at it, because that's what we're using on the upland. And we're trying to see how we can try to evolve in irrigation system to make sure that we get 2 or 3 times harvest per year. Then you can see the lowland, you see the kind of economic practices. I think you can see both men and women have been trained to carry on the kind of tax and the kind of expectation we deserve and try to feed our country.
There were several other panels under the various themes that discussed a range of interesting topics and put forward sound policy recommendations. For example, under the Institutional Framework for Policy Implementation theme, there was a panel that discussed the role of faith-based initiative in fostering development. There was also a panel on addressing special challenges, youth and employment, where one of the panelists spoke of the importance of foreign exchange programs as an important tool in exposing youth to other cultures.
Let them go to the Caribbean and see how the other flags that came from this coast are operating in the Caribbean, because it came directly from Africa. And we need to do that inter-exchange and then follow into Europe and America.
The policy implementation in a challenging macroeconomic context theme also featured its panel on special economic zones and direct foreign investment. After a full 2 days of productive discussions, the conference wrapped up with concluding remarks by the hosts, USAID and the University of Liberia. Thomas J. of the Policy Institute at the University of Liberia spoke on behalf of the university.
We need to develop a shared ambition of building a strong Liberia and a strong economy. We need to look at a bigger picture to forge a sort of national alliance for sustainable development. And this is the only way that these dialogues that we are having can yield the desired results that will lead to growth and development. This is very, very important because in most cases, we tend to be too partisan in many of the things we talk about, when in reality, we should be looking at Liberia as the political least common denominator that will determine what we do in terms of going forward. So over the past few
days you will see that you brought out so many things that if taken forward can help us, but you need the political environment, you need the political will to be able to take this to the next level. And I thought that message needed to be struck home. And one of the things I was missing, particularly in the discussion this morning, is that yes, we talk, I agree, that is fantastic, but I didn't hear anything on human capital development, something that I'm very passionate about. I'm a product of the University of Liberia. I didn't come from Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge, but I tell you, I do it when I want to do it. Then I do it best. That means that when we were at the University of Liberia, I'm so happy to tell you that, we did have the sort of education that enabled us to play the kind of role we play. And that's why, for me, the development of the human capital is important. If you don't have the human capital, then certainly you have a problem. Where are the engineers? Where are the medical doctors? Etc., etc. All of that is important because without that, this country is not going to go anywhere, particularly in the age of the knowledge-based economy. I must say that we're going to follow the footsteps of Singapore, Taiwan, etc., etc. But even where we want to agree to other things, we still need the role of the human capital in this country. Plantation is fantastic. Our experience with plantation is such that, and this is my final point, our experience with plantation in this country is that plantation is based on unskilled labor. Is that the way forward? Do we still want to recycle? There are people in Firestone, 4 generations down the line, who've been tappers all throughout their lives, and it hasn't improved. Secondly, we need employment in those sectors, but at the same time, we need sectors that will make Liberians to be skilled in whatever they are doing.
Dr. Anthony S. Chen, Mission Director of USA Liberia, closed with a big thank you to all the organizers of the conference and everyone.
Thank you all for coming. I certainly feel it's been successful. I hope you share that sentiment. Thank you all very much.